Dogworks Radio is sponsored by Alaska Dogworks. Check out their website at alaskadogworks.com. Radio Free Palmer 89.5 KVRF presents Mushing Radio, hosted by Robert Forto. Mushing Radio is about dog-powered sports, living in the Great White North, and mushing. Visit our website at mushingradio.com. Here is your host, Robert Forto.
Hello and welcome, everybody. This is Robert Forto, and you're listening to our continued 2022 Iditarod coverage here on KVRF 89.7 in the Mat-Su Valley. RadioFreePalmer.org is our live streaming site. You can find all of our episodes, even after Iditarod is over on DogWorksRadio.com. And we're active all year long over on social media, using the same hashtag or same Twitter account and Facebook. And I am joined today by my co-host, Toni Reitter, calling in from Kenai, Alaska. Toni, how's it going?
It's going really well. It's a nice, bright, sunshiny day. My dog has been sunning himself all over the house and the yard today. So it's definitely the end of Iditarod and the end of, I think, our long winter.
Yes. Isn't today the first day of spring?
I have absolutely no idea. I don't even know that I know what the date is today.
Yes. I seem to have found that somewhere, and I think it is. But, of course, when you're in Alaska, typically, like I said last night or the night before, the first day of spring typically is right after the end of Iditarod. So let's talk about the wrap-up. Since we were on air last night, we had a Red Lantern recipient come in, as well as the last mushers into Nome. So we had Yuka Honda come in and Apayak Reitter come in as the Red Lantern. I saw two quick stories about both of those guys. What did they say, or what did Yuka say when she got there to Nome? Something about a favorite beverage.
Yeah. So as she was getting checked in and everything, the announcer asked her, because Yuka is very short. She's very tiny. She's very petite. She's absolutely adorable. You could put her in your back pocket and keep her forever. And so the announcer, it was almost midnight. Everyone's slap happy by this point. And she said something to the tune of, Yuka, you're so tiny. How are you able to complete this race? And Yuka said that, she wasn't sure, but maybe it was because she drinks a lot of beer, and it was beer power that got her through. So that was just one of the funniest moments, and the way that Yuka said it, she's always got such a giant, bright smile and a lot of energy. She was so excited when they announced that she had finished the Iditarod, and she was jumping up and down and cheering as they gave her stats. So it was just a real highlight, I think, for the last couple of days that have been kind of a nail-biter, just watching the storms progress and everything, just to have that celebration was so much fun for so many fans that stayed up late and watched.
And just, 11 seconds behind Yuka is Apayak. What happened when she came under the arch there?
Well, she was met when she came up off of the beach onto the street. She was met by the teacher on the trail for this year, and he handed her the Red Lantern, so she got to carry that in. She also pulled out her transgender pride flag, and so she was waving it as she came under the Burled Arch. There were a lot of people out on the street to greet these final mushers, which was awesome to see. When Apayak came up into the chute, there were a lot of people waving those pride flags, really cheering her on, just a lot of excitement. The 1980 Red Lantern winner met her there to help award her with the Red Lantern and the Widow's Lantern, which was also funny because nobody thought to bring a ladder. And where that lantern sits on the Burled Arch, you have to have a ladder or a really tall person. to grab it, and your life, Seth Olsam, who of course Apayak was running dogs out of yours kennel, he was there, so they told him that he was the tallest person. He had to try and get it down off the arch, which he was successful in doing. And so Apayak got to extinguish both the Red Lantern and the Widow's Lamp.
Very cool. And we talked about both of those stories last night. And we're going to talk a little bit about the awards and who got what, at least at the time of recording. It's about 5:45 Pacific time, 4:45 Alaska time. So the banquet has not started yet. It'll probably be going as we're talking. But we have some news before we carry on with our show. First off, some big news with Toni. I saw on Twitter last night, and as a matter of fact, she and I talked about this before we recorded last night's show, but she has gained a heck of a lot of podcast fans over the last couple of weeks, and we are pleased to announce that Toni and I are going to be working together approximately every 2 weeks or so throughout the season, or off season, if you will, with a podcast. And it's going to be a mushing related podcast. We're going to tell stories. We're going to give news and updates, maybe an interview or two. And of course, anything that is happening in the off season that leads up to next year's Iditarod. So I don't want to steal all of your thunder, Toni, but what can you tell your new podcast fans about your future plans?
I have fans? Why?
Yes.
We haven't really gotten a chance to really sit down and talk about the future of it. I'm really excited, though, to kind of see where we can take this. It's been a learning curve over the last 2 years. Alex had been pestering me forever to get me to come and guest host on the podcast, and he finally got his wish last year, and then he ditched us this year. So it's kind of been just, me jumping from the kiddie pool right into the deep end. I've enjoyed it. I'm enjoying it. I have an outlet to talk about dog mushing and Iditarod and all of the different aspects that fall in those categories, where people aren't, I guess, tired of hearing me ramble on and on. It's a little bit easier to do this than to tweet it out or to Instagram. So it's a lot of fun, and I'm excited for it. I really look forward to it. I gave the countdown that it's 97 days till the signups for next Iditarod open up. So I'm looking forward to having an outlet to keep this going so that I'm not just sitting here counting down the days until the picnic.
Yes, and of course, we definitely welcome our friend Alex back when he's ready. For folks that did not know or didn't follow the story on Twitter, Alex and I have been doing this Iditarod show for over a decade, and on many years we would do shows in the off season, but his profession really took a hit during COVID. I mean, big time, with like a lot of people's jobs did. And thankfully, right about now he's going back to work and doing the things that he does. He's a professional storyteller, and he's getting gigs now and doing the thing that he loves, but he's always welcome back onto the show. So before we go any further, I have to thank all of our fans from all over the place. And I'm going to tell you guys some stats real quick. So we have had over the past 28 days. So this includes Iditarod and then a week or so prior to that with our other podcast. We typically do a weekly podcast, my wife Michelle and I, and we do dog training tips and tricks. We typically get about 3,000 or 4,000 downloads per episode on that. So this includes a couple of those episodes. By and large, this is our reach for Iditarod 2022. We have 389,031 downloads of our show. Over 1/3 people have, or downloads, have listened to this. We're averaging about 16 to 21,000 downloads per episode per day. And of course, that changes, can go up and down, but they only do it as a daily stat. Our highest ranking episode happened to be the Mushergrams and Sportsmanship. Of course, that was probably one of my favorite episodes, and it appears to be for our fans as well. And a couple of other more in the weed stats, and I think this one is really cool, Toni, is we have been downloaded or listened to in 80 different countries in the last 28 days. Of course, in the top 10, we have United States by far number one, Canada, Finland, Germany, Norway, United Kingdom, Australia, Sweden, India, and Netherlands. Those are the top 10. And then for folks that live in the United States, we have, and of course we have lots and lots of listeners from around the world, but we have Alaska, California, Michigan, Virginia, Washington, Ohio, Wisconsin, New York, Illinois, and Minnesota. Now, of course, some of those are real hotbeds for mushing when you think about Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, etc. But it's interesting that we have a bunch of listeners coming in from Ohio and Virginia, places that aren't typical mushing hotbeds. So I definitely want to thank everybody for that one. And last but not least, we have to say thanks to all of our fans from all over the world. It has been amazing. This is why we do it. We're not doing this to make millions of dollars. We don't have a big-time sponsorship. We are not, we're not, under a big media company. It's literally myself and my wife and Toni and Alex when he's around that makes this entire Iditarod show possible. So I want to send a thank you out to everybody. And I also want to sort of single out our fans at the Ugly Dogs. So many retweets, so many comments, so many back and forth conversations. They are an awesome group. And I am so glad that we were able to share that with them and so many new people that found our podcast through that hashtag Ugly Dogs. So that's sort of my take on a thanks for our fans. Do you have something in mind as well, Toni?
I've been getting messages from different teachers all over the United States where their classrooms are listening into our podcast, either in part or in full. And they're saying just how much that it helps with the education process of the race and gives a little more insight into some of the stuff that doesn't get covered by their other sources. So I was really excited to hear about that because growing up here in Alaska, the Iditarod education program was a huge thing back in the day. That wasn't that long ago. And so, just the idea of me being the runner-up to the Iditarod Championship, having a small hand in giving some classrooms some fun little tidbits about the races is kind of cool. It's also, as you started giving off all of those numbers, it started getting really intimidating, and I'm like getting inside my head. But it's been fun. I've gotten nothing but encouragement from so many people on all different platforms. So thank you so much, everyone.
And lastly, in terms of thanks and listener tidbits, we have had so many messages of people that start their day with our podcast, whether they're driving on a commute or they're listening at the dinner table and talking about our show as they're eating dinner with their family, or there's even a few people that have said that they listen to us as they get ready to fall asleep. So that's cool. They're listening to us as a bedtime story. So I think that is awesome. So do us a favor, guys. If you like what you hear, please leave us a comment. Please leave us a review if you will. That really helps out on our rankings. And if you would like, hit that subscribe button wherever you're listening right now, and you will get an immediate download to our shows. You will get the dog training shows as well, but I assume if you listen to Iditarod, you're probably a dog lover anyway, so there's going to be helpful tips. But if Toni and I do not do a show until mid-April, it will just miraculously show up on your phone or in your computer or whatever, and it will show Toni and Robert back on the air. So with that, let's move over to some news. We've had some interesting news develop over the last day or so, in particular about one musher who was penalized for breaking a rule. I had known this rule just as a dog musher. I had never seen it enforced over any type of race I've ever been involved in. It is Rule 37. So interestingly enough, we talked about Rule 35 this year, Rule 36, and here we are at Rule 37. So what happened on the trail, and what do you think is going to happen in the future?
So this is going by, and I shouldn't say an unofficial, but this is coming from a musher's page directly. There is no official announcement from Iditarod. I assume they were going to wait and explain that maybe somehow during the Iditarod banquet, because I still don't see anything official from the race on their website. But Michelle Phillips, who I believe finished 17th, I think she was right behind Mitch, and he came in 16th. So she was stuck out in the wind during the windstorm that Brent and Dallas ran through. We've heard stories from Mitch Seavey where he tried to leave Koyuk several times that day and kept getting blown off course, doing cartwheels and barrel rolls, and so he turned his team around and went back to Koyuk. He shared a video of that yesterday, just some of the wind, and the visibility was almost impossible to see anything. So what happened was Michelle realized that during this windstorm that she needed to either hunker down or turn around because visibility was not safe to continue forward. But she happened to look down at her GPS instrument, and it showed that she was very close to a shelter cabin that she knew about from previous races. So she went ahead and went further to get to that cabin. My understanding is from how her post was worded, the winds were so bad she was concerned for her team's welfare, so she brought the dogs inside. Now, Rule 37 states a lot of different things about dog care, but I believe the second bullet point down is dogs do not go into any shelter unless they are in the care of the veterinarian, is the basic understanding of that rule. I've heard it called the Susan Butcher rule over the years because it apparently started around the time that she was racing, and back in the 80s, she apparently, and I don't think she's the only one, but it gets called the Susan Butcher rule. But some mushers, they have friends along the trail, and so instead of camping out on the trail, they would just mush up to their buddy's cabin and basically couch surf instead of having to stay out in the elements. And so it was considered an unfair advantage. So this rule came about. So that's kind of where the history of that rule is. But it's still enforced today, and it apparently applies to shelter cabins. You're only allowed to have veterinarians bring your dogs in and out, and that's just for vet care, and not, just to let them hang out and warm up. So Michelle was in this cabin with dogs. It's my understanding from people commenting is that she was not the only one in that cabin. Milla was also in that cabin. But according to Michelle's post, the reason why she was penalized was because the race got several musher complaints from other mushers saying that she was in there with her dogs and she broke Rule 37. She did end her post by saying this will be her last Iditarod. I don't know that that was planned ahead of time or if that was in response to the penalty or the fact that other mushers complained about it. There's a little ambiguity there that, speculation is going wild, and I don't really want to speculate on that. I would hope that if that decision was because of this penalty, that, maybe when she gets some time to reflect, she may change her mind. But I don't want to really rail against either side. If she felt that there was no other option but to bring her dogs in, she knew the rule and she chose to do that anyway. So it's kind of like in football when the defensive player goes ahead and makes an illegal tackle to stop the runner from making that touchdown. You know you're going to get the flag. You know there's going to be a 10-yard penalty or more, but at least they didn't score, or taking a mulligan in golf. You know that, maybe you could possibly hit this ball and it go where you finally want it to go, but it's still not going to really affect much. So you go ahead and pick up the ball and just take the penalty. That's how I understood the decision on both the musher's part and the race marshal's part. I don't know, as from a musher's perspective, what that looks like, but I can understand where the race marshal is between a rock and a hard place, because yes, Michelle is in the cabin, and I assume Mila is also going to be penalized if she had dogs in the cabin. Yes, they did, and they say that it's because the conditions were too bad for their dogs to be outside. But then you have other mushers that passed by them or camped near them, and their dogs were outside the whole time and did just fine. So it's a gray area. With a race judge not sitting there on every mile of the trail, that's where these rules, I don't think you can have kind of that gray area other than what the race marshal decides is worth the penalty.
So, Toni, there's a heck of a lot to unpack here. First off, we don't know if we don't know what the penalty is. We don't know if it's a loss of spots or what. But I'm looking at it right now.
I should have brought that up. Yes, she says that she's been dropped 4 places, which puts her out of the money.
Oh, okay, okay.
Eventually, essentially. So, I don't know, as specifics as how many minutes per dog was it? Is that how they decided that penalty? I'm not sure, but she said that she will drop 4 places.
Okay, so she finished, it looks like right now, in 17th, and if she dropped down 4, that would put her at 21st and out of the money, as we mentioned. So this, as you mentioned, Toni, this is known as the dog care rule. I've been covering Iditarod, at least on this podcast, for 11 years. I cannot think a single time we've ever talked about somebody getting a penalty because of this. Of course, there's been lots of mushers who have either scratched or had to DQ or whatever for inappropriate dog care in one method or another. We won't get into that. But I've never heard of somebody that was penalized for this particular instant where they brought the dogs into a shelter cabin. So which I find really interesting. Secondly, we talked a lot about sportsmanship on the podcast this year and how mushers are a different group and how, a lot of times they're helping out each other. And it seems counterproductive unless there was some feelings hurt or some words said. And, of course, we can only speculate with those mushers that came afterwards. And there was, if the shelter cabin was full. And remember, this shelter cabin is about the size of a large living room, living room, dining room combo. That's about how big a 12 by 12 shelter cabin is. So it's not very big. And if you get 10, 12, 14 dogs in there and everybody's wet gear around the wood stove, it's going to fill up very quick. And I've been in those types of cabins before just with people, and you have people sleeping all over each other. They're sleeping on top of each other, neck to neck, butt to butt, the whole 9 yards in these cabins with gear everywhere as it dries out. Third, in terms of dog care, of course, this is not your golden retriever. These dogs are perfectly capable in almost every instance of being able to stay outside and weather these type of storms. That's what they're bred to do, is to be hardy dogs that can weather these types of storms. Of course, you have to take precautions, and we saw that with Brent Sass many days ago, how he sort of huddled all of his dogs around in this windstorm, sort of in a circle around his sled versus them all strung out, over 50 feet or whatever the length of the line was for the number of dogs. So there are ways to do that, but it's just really interesting to me why they jumped so hard on this year. And I know that there was also a comment about, well, these other guys had dogs in the cabin as well, but there's a preface to that is those guys scratched. And I don't know exactly who that was that had the dog teams in there, but it was that group of 4 or 6 people over the last few days that were holed up in these cabins. And yeah, they did bring their dogs in, and then they did scratch. So very interesting rule, very interesting outcome, and to see where this sort of leads. Now, you had mentioned on Facebook, last point on this, Toni, you had mentioned on Facebook that this may be something that they should address off-season. And this occurs in other sports, of course, in particular in football. If something goes wrong in the season, whether it be in overtime or, kickoffs or whatever, they will address that in the off-season. And the Iditarod is taking a similar stance to a lot of rules like that. What are your thoughts on that? And then we'll move on.
Sure. So, when I did comment on that, it was kind of a knee-jerk reaction. I didn't really think it through or listen to any other voices. It was just, look, if enough people complain about this and you've got mushers saying they're not going to run again until this rule is changed or whatever, and depending on which mushers they are, someone like a Michelle Phillips, you don't want to lose her from that race. She's well known as a really good dog musher in dog care and as a racer. So her opinion's gonna have some weight to it. We've seen them walk back or change rules in the past based on feedback from the mushers. I'm thinking like the trailers for the sleds. Can you carry dogs? Can you not carry dogs? They walked that rule back just in the last year since they're able to carry dogs apparently this year. They changed the wording ever so slightly to give the race officials and the judges, the marshal, a little more control or a little less leeway depending on the type of rule that needs to be changed. I think in this case, the only thing that you would maybe want to change the wording of is, hey, if it's past 60-mile-an-hour winds or whatever is deemed, the danger level, go ahead and bring the dogs in, and that won't be a penalty. That way, it's easy to enforce because they're able to check the wind temperature and all of that. They're able to check that. So that's not something that you need a race judge for every mile of the race. We have the technology now to go ahead and just base it on science there. But that also requires the musher to actually know the difference between 40 miles an hour, 60 miles an hour, or higher. But I would also argue that some of these dogs are Yukon Quest dogs, and I hear the winds and the cold are just as bad, if not worse, than what they experienced this last week. So I can understand where the rule may not have to be changed, and it has to be more of a, don't do it. So it'll be interesting. I'm sure that it will be a topic of discussion whether or not the rule gets changed or reworded. We probably won't know until at least October, and maybe even more likely when they, finally publish the rules online for the next year.
So a little bit more on my side, just based on what you said. We've had many dogs over the years in our kennel. We talked about the dogs are perfectly capable of staying outside. We've had many dogs in our kennel over the years who could be really, really sick or really, really injured. Say, a broken paw or something a little bit more major than a strain. And I don't care how sick or how injured those dogs are, they do not want to be in the house. They will, if they're mobile and able to get around, they stand at the front door. They howl when they hear the other dogs singing down in the kennel. They want to be with their buddies, and anytime you separate that is a quandary. So I guess my beef with this whole thing is, if it is allowed, how do you police that? So in this case, say that, and again, we're not pointing fingers at all, but let's say that Michelle Phillips has her dog in this shelter cabin, and along comes 3 or 4 other teams, and they all want to bring their dogs in too. So now you have the potential of having 40 or 50 dogs in this cabin. They're all in the same situation in terms of weather, whether it's 60-mile-an-hour winds or whatever. How do you police that? Do you say, okay, Mr. Johnson, you've been in here five hours. It's time for you to take your dogs outside and let Mr. Smith's dogs come in. How in the world would you police that?
Right.
Yeah, that's...
Yeah, and I did see a comment from someone. I don't remember if it was you or someone else, and they were like, "Well, now it's just going to be a race, not only to checkpoints, the different shelter cabins. If they were to open that up to, just go ahead and it's a free for all and let your dogs in wherever." So I see all of those sides, and it's hard to, I'm one of those. The rules are the rules, and I completely respect Mark Nordman's decision. I think it was fair to give a penalty versus a disqualification. My understanding is that he was well within his rights as race marshal to disqualify the mushers that did that, and instead he's choosing to give them a time penalty, it sounds like.
Yep.
And I think that's fair. I think, it's like I said, it's one of those things. It's taking a mulligan. It's accepting that penalty. We'll accept the 10 yards because this person didn't score. And it's the same thing here. I'll take that penalty because I did right by my dogs. She even said that. She's like, I accept it. I'm not ashamed that I did right. I feel I was doing right by my dogs doing this. And that's what should be encouraged. And I think that the choice to penalize was the fair choice in this situation. Whether or not the rule needs to change, I'm not the person to say that. Of all the people, I have the least knowledge about the animals in general. In mushing, I can parrot back what I learned from you and from other mushers that I know. But at the end of the day, I don't have that experience. I don't have that day to day. And I wasn't sitting out there in 60-mile-an-hour winds. I whine when it's 5 miles per hour, and I live in Kenai, which it's always windy in Kenai. So, I am not the person to make that judgment. But I do feel that in this particular situation, it's a no-win situation for everybody, and I think the fair choice was made. Yes,
I agree. And it was not me that made the comment. I don't think I commented on that thread at all on any of the pages, but I fully agree with you. Rules are rules, and whether they apply for next year or not, just like in any other sporting event, whatever the rules are when you start, those should be respected and maintained until it's over. Now, if they change them next year, that's a different story, but everybody knows what they signed up for, and they have to accept that. Whether they agree or not, they have to accept that because that was the rules when they started. So we'll see how this develops. It's going to be a very interesting story to see how it plays out, and we would love to hear what you think about this. Do you think this is a good rule, a bad rule? Should they change it? Is the race at fault? Is Michelle at fault? Obviously, she's the one that wrote the post, so she is, I'm sure, ready for some criticism on her own if that is pointed her way. So what are your guys' thoughts? Let us know on our social channels, and we can keep the discussion going. So let's talk about a couple of other things before we go tonight on our last episode of our Iditarod coverage, and that is the banquet. It appears to me at about right now the banquet should be kicking off. You can watch it in a variety of ways, I believe. You can watch it on the Insider, and I'm sure some other places to get it. I don't know if you're allowed to live stream there. Are you, Toni? If you were there, could you live stream this?
I want to err on the side of no, just because I've gotten in trouble, not as a volunteer, but just as a fan there on Front Street, where certain people thought that I should not be live streaming. Of course, it was a public place, so I was well within my rights, but it was, they tried to contest it. And I wasn't even really doing a live. I was FaceTiming with family. So
Okay.
it wasn't like I was sharing with the world. But I've never seen anyone get in trouble for sharing video. But I've also never seen anybody do a live feed from either the musher banquet or the finisher banquet.
So let's talk a little bit about this. I have never been to this final banquet at the end of Iditarod. I've been to Iditarod finish a few times, but never had the pleasure of going. So I have a couple of questions right off the bat, Toni, and then I would like you to describe sort of the atmosphere and what happens.
I've never been to the finishers banquet either.
Oh,
so.
okay, okay, but you've definitely
I can fake it.
Yes.
I'm really good at faking my knowledge.
But
here.
you've watched them at least on video. I have not. I've been to many other mushers banquets over the years. So number one, the banquet that's happening right now. My first question to you, and of course, answer these as you go in your detail. Are fans or the lay public allowed? I mean, can you buy a ticket and go and be a part of it and get the food and the whole 9 yards? Number two, how is it structured? Is it first to last musher? Is it last to first? And then my next question is, what is sort of the setup? You know, where are the mushers sitting? Where are the fans sitting? And what's sort of the general overview of this? And then I guess that sort of goes to, how long does it last? We've all heard about the kickoff banquet that's 2 or 3 hours long, but I've heard this one can be much longer. Go ahead and tell us what you know.
Okay, so yes, it is a public event. You can get a ticket. They set it up, I believe it's at the gym there at the school, I believe is where they have it. I've got it up. I've got it muted on my computer, but they're doing a prayer right now. They have one of the local pastors there giving the invocation. But they set it up. You're there at the cafeteria. It's like you're back in school. You're sitting at the cafeteria tables with the picnic type bench thing. It's a catered event. It's always really nice. One year they had like this big fruit display in the shape of a dog or something. I don't know what it was actually supposed to be, but they told me it was a dog. And it looks, as I'm looking through the crowd that they're showing, it's kind of a mix match of, mushers sitting at tables together, fans intermingled. It's a little less formal than if you're used to watching the musher banquet in Anchorage, where they have the really fancy tables and fans are definitely segregated from the mushers. It's a little less segregation, and it's much more crowded looking. So that's been one of the major reasons why I've never even thought about going to the finishers banquet, just because I don't do crowd.
Okay.
I'm just looking at it now and thinking of that and getting anxious. So what they normally do is they go back to front. So they award from Red Lantern to then capping off with, of course, the champion. So you'll have Apayuk come up first, tell her story, accept her Red Lantern again. This year is the inaugural year that Linden Incorporation, they are sponsoring that award, so she will get $1,000 on top of that. So congratulations to her. That's not normally what's given to the Red Lantern, so that's really cool. And then they go down the line, and each musher gets a chance to say a little something. So very similar, again, to the Mushers Banquet in Anchorage, where they all come up, they draw their bib number, and they say thank you to their sponsors, to their fans, and whoever. It's the same thing, but in reverse of finishing place. as far as mushers going up. Now, that's been the norm for the last few years. I'm not sure what they're doing this year. It kind of looks like it's normal banquet everything. I'm not seeing a lot of social distancing or, I'm not seeing anybody with masks right now. I see Dallas's bald head right now. Sorry, squirrel moment. Oh, I'm sorry. I do see two people with masks on. So there are people with masks, but it doesn't look like it's a requirement. So it does feel like a normal finisher's banquet, and that's the choice of not just Iditarod, but I'm sure the city of Nome. They're the ones that had to okay it. They're the ones that asked them not to do one 2 years ago, and now we're doing this one here. So it's very informal. It's a celebration. It's a way for Nome to come out and have their moment. Hosting the Iditarod, just like Anchorage gets to host the start, Nome hosts the finish in more ways than one.
And of course, as they tell their stories, everybody's given an envelope of some type, and I believe in that envelope is their finisher's check. And remember, everybody 20 down gets $1,049. That is to commemorate the supposed 1,049 miles. So the 1,000 miles plus the 49 for the 49th state of Alaska. I believe also in that envelope is the finisher's patch that you will receive if you finish, and that is a highly coveted patch. You will see a lot of Iditarod finishers walking around town with that patch on their jacket. I'm not sure, but I would assume that the belt buckle is also in there. And remember that you only get one belt buckle, and there are stories upon stories of that if you go back into our previous year's coverage, you will listen to those. That is probably one of the most coveted things in Iditarod is that belt buckle. And then, of course, there is other material and things in that as well. There is also, during this time, the presentations for the different awards. So if a musher has received some type of award, whether it be the first to the Yukon or the fancy dinner at the lakefront or the first to the halfway point, whatever those awards are, they will be represented, including the checks, I assume, or money or any other things that come along with that. And also they are giving out the other awards that we're going to talk about in just a second. And then they also do the raffle. And in years past, we talked about the trucks and all that were a part of the raffle. Nowadays, it's mainly a cash raffle, but I believe they do that during the banquet as well. And then finally, they do the presentations of the different trophies, whether it be the Red Lantern Trophy for Apayak or the Joe Reddington Trophy there for Brent Sass. I believe the main trophy, the Red Lantern and the Joe Reddington Championship Trophy, stays at Iditarod headquarters in Wasilla. I do not know if the winner gets like a smaller one. Do you know that for a fact or not?
I know that answer.
Okay.
Yes, they do. It's actually about the same size. The only difference is it doesn't have the pedestal, or I think that's what it's called, is a pedestal where they are able to put the engraved names of each champion.
Yep.
It doesn't come with that. It's just that bronze statue part of the trophy of Joe holding his dog there underneath the burled arch. They do get one, and that means if you win multiple times, Dallas Stevie has 5 of those suckers.
Yes. And
Mitch Stevie has 3 of those suckers. I know because I know exactly what their display cases look like.
Yep.
And I know in the case of both Dallas and Mitch, they display them. Of course, they have tours that come and stuff. So, of course, tourists come and that's what they want to see. But they also have wrapped the rose garland around those trophies that they put on the dogs there at the finish line.
Right.
So they also have the dried roses. So it's always a really nice focal point for, I think, all of the champions. Those are just the 2 that I know how they display theirs. I know Martin Boozer also has a very nice big room when he does tours where He has some amazing displays. I've never actually seen them in person. I've seen pictures, and I'm in awe. Jeff King, another one that really knows how to make a statement with a room. So they do get one. It looks identical to the one there at headquarters in Wasilla, and it's big and heavy, and thank God I don't have to dust those things.
Yes, and I forgot to mention that at least in years past, I assume that they still do this, that every finisher gets a cup-type trophy, and it will say on it, I don't know if the
it's
plate...
only the top 20.
Only the top 20. On that plate, it will say, for example, Travis Beals, 12th place, and it will tell the time that he comes in. For example, for him, it'll say 9 days, 17 hours, 39 minutes, 54 seconds. So they get a trophy as well. So that is the banquet itself. Before we end on this topic, who do you know has won the various awards that they have either already announced or already given out?
So we only know of the awards that they won while on the trail. They have not announced, or if they have, I can't hear it, but it doesn't look like it. It looks like Rob Urbach is doing his welcome speech right now. But we only know of the ones that are that were done on the trail, and they don't actually have the list published yet. So you would have to go back through the race to see it. Most of the awards are going to Brent Sapp. We know that because he was first in the halfway point. He was first to Unilacleat. He was first to. And so a lot of those awards are the first to the Yukon, first to the halfway point, first to the coast. Those he rounded up all of those. We know that I believe it was Aaron Burmeister that won first to McGrath, and that was the last time that Brent didn't win a first to.
Okay.
He won all of the ones, including first to know. So those are the ones we know. And we know Rookie of the Year award, unless Hannah got a penalty that we don't know about. Hannah Lyric is going to be Rookie of the Year. It's always given out to the rookie who has the top finish. We know the Red Lantern Award, of course. She came in last night, just before midnight, was Apayak Reitter. She'll be getting that Red Lantern Award, and she's presented with $1,000. Most improved musher, I did not have the time. Normally I go back and I do the math to try and figure out who they're going to give it to. That's normally given to somebody who, their rookie year, they came in 53rd, and this next year they jumped up 20 places or 30 places to win that award. That's typically what the Most Improved Musher Award is. They also have the Sportsmanship Award. We don't know. There's been so many stories. I have had a lot of people message me in the last day asking if you have to be a finisher of the race to qualify. And while that is the norm, I do know that in one specific case a few years ago, Scott Jansen had to scratch in the Iditarod, but he was given the Sportsmanship Award because the reason he scratched was he was helping another musher who was in distress. And they both hit their SOS buttons to get that musher out. So they were both out of the race, but because of his sacrifice of his own race, he won the Sportsmanship Award. So don't think it's going to be a name that's in, the 37 that finished. It could be any one of the 49 mushers that started this race.
And go ahead, Toni. I'm sorry.
I
I was going to say, in all of those other awards that we know of, they often include something else. So whether it be the artwork or the native crafts like the beaver mittens or something like that, or in that the Ruby Award where you get the meal that is awarded at a later date, and it's for not just Brent but a guest of his choosing. He can bring somebody else to that, and I believe that is an open invitation for the year. And also there's a bunch of these awards that have cash awards as well, like that Ruby Award. I think is it $1,000 or $3,000 in $1 bills?
It is $3,500 in $1 bills. And the one year that Mitch Seavey won was the year that they didn't do the meal or the money. And again, it was Scott Jansen who gave that prize money anyway because he didn't like the idea that the first of the Yukon didn't get an award.
Yes, and he is a mortician by trade, and the story is he provided that award in a little coffin, which is interesting. I've always loved to hear that story. And then of course there's an award or two where they're giving out fish. I think one of them gives 1,000 pounds of salmon or something like that. So obviously they do not give you that at the banquet. I'm sure that they ship that to you at a later time, because Alaska Airlines is probably dealing with enough stuff over the next couple of days, getting everybody out, that they don't want to have to deal with 1,000 pounds of salmon. So that is that. So we have two other things. I lied a second ago and said we only had two things before, but I have to ask you this. This is what we always do with Alex, and I think we did it last year as well. Toni, this was a really low year in terms of stories. We always hear all of the stories that happen, whether they're on news reports or whatever. So I'm going to ask you first, what is your favorite, or maybe not favorite, but most memorable story of this year?
Oh, goodness. Most memorable. Well, there were no Rainy Pass ponies. So that was mine from last year because Alex let me have that. I think one of the most memorable ones for me is Aaron Burmeister's story. I know I picked him to win, and, he didn't come through with that prediction. I kind of knew the second I said his name that it wouldn't happen because I do believe in jinxes, Robert.
I know you do.
But he, he's choosing, like Dallas, he's choosing to take a step back. Now, Aaron's done this previously. He was going to retire a few years ago, and he failed that retirement, and I'm very thankful for that. But Aaron's kids are getting older, and he wants to be a part of their interests in their lives. They've been a part of his interests in lives. Now it's their turn. As a daddy's girl myself, I totally respect that, and he's even more one of my favorite mushers now for that. But in each checkpoint, especially after he basically conceded the race, that there was no way that he was going to be able to push for first. He was sitting in third at that point, and he knew that there was just too much time to make up on Brent and Dallas. So he decided to really just start taking it in. And when he hit Unalakleet, that's when the emotion started. There was a very powerful, in my opinion, interview that he did for Insider, where once he was there on the coast, which he called home, those were his home trails. He grew up in Nome. He ran on the sea ice. That's the kind of mushing he learned. Was all jumble ice and windswept slick snow. But he looked out at all of the fans that were there and the people around, and he just started mentioning that these were family, these are friends, these are people that he's like, he's never taken the time to really spend any time with them while he's on the trail, because it was always, well, I'll see him next year, and then he started to break down. He said, but there is no next year. Yeah. This is it. And that for me was the most memorable. I really did choke up quite a bit, and every time one of the mushers chokes up, I'm gonna at least choke up. I may say I'm dead inside, but man, you give me a musher that's crying, and I'm right there with them. So that was probably one of the most memorable ones. The other one being Jeff King coming out of nowhere to run a dog team 3 days before the race started.
Toni, you picked both of mine on the list. My first.
I almost didn't say anything about Jeff. I was like, he's gonna want to talk about that.
Yep.
That's why I just said a little bit. I'm not gonna ramble on and fangirl about it.
Hey, that's okay. My first story was the Aaron Burmeister, and that's just by nature of me going second or third. When we had a three-peat of hosts on here. But yeah, my first story was the Aaron Burmeister story. I thought that was a classic way to finish. Of course, he didn't win the race, but my goodness, what a story there. I got a chance to meet Aaron a few years ago. I told this story last year. When we did our Serum Run trip, we were heading out of Nenana. Our trail crew was not there yet. Somebody said, hey, give Aaron Burmeister a call. He shared time at that time between a kennel in the Nenana area as well as in Nome. They said, hey, give Aaron a call. He will help you out. And Aaron came into Nenana there and says, I'll help you out on the first section of the trail. And he wrote up directions on the back of an old manila envelope. And he says, okay, I want you to go up this far, and then I want you to turn left at about 100 yards, and then I want you to go about a quarter of a mile, and you're going to see some railroad tracks on the right. I want you to make a left turn there, but if you miss this turn, make sure you turn right here at about 500 yards, and then you'll make it here. And this envelope became synonymous with the Sierra Run trip that was a trip of one thing after another, good and bad. So with that, I was so happy to meet Aaron, and he provoke his knowledge on us with that trip. In regard to Jeff and Nick, I thought that was sort of the storybook story. Of course, everybody has followed Nick for the last few years. He's always been so close to winning this race, and it very well could have been his year because he's just that kind of musher. He's won so many of the races leading up to this year, so many of the qualifying type races, and of course the story with the whole COVID thing about him testing, just a couple of days before the race. I'm sure he had nothing in his plans that says, if I have a positive test, this is what will happen. But of course, with that, Jeff just stepping up. And of course, Jeff could probably drive any dog team in any of these kennels that is on this race roster right now and would probably do very well. But just the whole story with Jeff, I'm sure when you have that many Iditarods under your belt, I don't know how many that is, but I am sure he has a system down. He knows exactly what he's going to do, when and where. He knows where he's going to stop and eat. He knows where he's going to camp. He knows what he wants to eat. He knows what gear to bring. He knows what works, what doesn't work. He knows how his sled functions when he hasn't slept in 5 days. He knows which dog is going to be the best lead dog at certain portions of the trail. Jeff did not know any of that. I'm sure he got a quick report from Nick a couple of days beforehand. I know they went out on a run together that Friday before, which is realistically 48 hours before the race if he went out on Friday afternoon. So he jumped on the sled and took off, and he made it to Nome and did it in fine fashion. I'm sure he would have much rather had a higher ranking, but he finished right there in 28th place with his handler, Amanda Otto, finishing right ahead of him. I'm sure now that he thinks about it, he thought, wow, this is the way to do this. I'm going to come in with my Padawan, I guess it wouldn't be a protege, that would be the opposite, but my up-and-coming musher that has worked with me for the last however many years. We're going to do this together and finish this together. I think that's a great way to go out, and I believe that Nick is very pleased with that. I don't know, was Nick in Nome when they finished, Toni?
He was.
Okay.
He was. I don't follow his social media very much, but he was posting regular updates showing that he was getting frustrated that he could not get that negative test result, but he did manage to get the result that he needed so that he could travel to Nome, and he did meet them in the chute. I did not get to see Jeff or Amanda come in. I saw the very tail end of that. I meant to mention this earlier, but one of our listeners, Christy Lent, she was up there as Miss Wheelchair Alaska, and she was in the chute when Amanda and Jeff came up, and she got to give him a big hug, and she told me that she told him, thank you for not dying, because that was apparently everybody's concern about poor Jeff, was that he was driving this Ferrari unprepared through the wilderness.
Right, right. So those are our favorite stories. What are your favorite stories? Again, let us know on social channels, and we will be happy to keep this conversation going. So our last piece of business on this year's Iditarod. As you guys know, if you have been a fan of this show for this year or many years past, we have been doing a musher profile of the evening every single night that we do this, and we always think long and hard who we're going to talk about on the last night, because it's really the last person that we're going to profile until next year. And often that is, a person that has a story that we haven't talked about, or the Red Lantern winner, or, somebody that's going to retire or something. But we have never, in all of our years that we've done this together, Alex and I, and Toni and Alex and I over the last couple of years, we have never done a musher profile of the year that was a dog team, the dogs of the day, or dog profile of the day. And I say it over and over and over again, and I'm sure Toni will definitely agree. This race is all about the dogs. There are never enough stories about the dogs. Of course, those are the true athletes of this race. We would not have this if it was not for the dogs. So tonight, our profile is of the dogs, and we're going to share a couple of stories from the faces of Iditarod, and then we're going to tell a story or two about our dogs from the past, and I am going to share a quick story about one of my dogs and how it is important in sort of my crazy Iditarod dream quest that I'm still on. Go for it, Toni.
Okay, so I'm just going to plug Jeff Schultz's program one more time, Faces of Iditarod. You can find it at facesofiditarod.com. You can go to iditarod.com. They've got a link to it there. You can go to faces.iditarod.com. And you can search, you can either just look at all of the faces that they have as they've posted them, or you can search based on musher, volunteer, or canine. He's got quite a few canines on there, but we just wanted to kind of give some love to some of these dogs. And really, there is no wrong answer. We should profile all of them, but he's got 168 dogs right now on his website with more to come. So that would be a whole other podcast, and you don't really need to. It's its own podcast, because you can click on any of these pictures and you can hear the musher or the handler answer these questions about the dogs. It was very hard to pick just a couple because I got very distracted, not only with all of these really great portraits of the dogs, but because we have so many creative names. I could talk about Dan Caduce's dog Dahmer, because they have a whole puppy, or not puppy, but they have a litter theme of serial killers, which I think is amazing. You've got, of course, Lev Schwartz has some of the best dog names out there, with Cramps and Not Today, and his, as he called him, his fuzzy garbage disposal Suicide, who is featured on Faces. It just popped up for me. And I'm kind of sad that it just popped up now, because I would love to talk about it, but I'd already picked my two, and that is, first off, we should go with the second place lead dog, Prophet, who is Dallas Seavey's main lead dog. He's a very important dog to this kennel. He thinks very highly of himself, so much so that he does not like running with a partner when he's running in lead. He has run single lead, and that's something that you don't normally see on the Iditarod Trail these days. Typically, you do see two dogs leading, and that's normally because they, in very easy terms to understand, one lead dog sets the pace. The other one actually listens to the musher and goes where the musher tells him to go. Even though they do rely heavily on the swing dogs to actually swing the team whichever way they want to go. But Prophet doesn't like to share, and so Prophet does his own thing. And so they told Jeff Schultz about Prophet. They said his personality is unique. He's a very playful, curious, and confident dog. His biggest personality quirk is that he has a really hard time running next to anybody else on the team. So even when he's not in lead, they normally have him running by himself on the gang line, which I do think makes the gang line a little bit longer than normal, and it does look awkward when you only see one dog running there. He's from a litter with named after religious leaders. So of course he's the prophet, and then you have a bishop, and they had the Lama for Dalai Lama. And I cannot remember, but Lama is in the Iditarod. I just can't remember who that dog is running with. It's not Chad Stoddard or one of the other CV teams. The prophet's dad is Reef, who was Dallas CV's star dog for many of his Iditarod championships. I believe he was there for the consecutive 3 that Dallas had in 14, 15, and 16. And then his mommy's name is Bumble, and she is across from Lance Mackey's Zorro and Jeff King's Shannon. So really important bloodlines for that dog. I really enjoyed watching him on the Insider. He always came in so strong. I can remember when he took off out of Cripple, and then again in Ruby, he really stretched out the team. I mean, they were running. It took Dallas everything to just kind of get them back into the lope, because Prophet's like, nope, we're going at full speed here. So always really fun to watch a sled dog that is so confident in his abilities or her abilities that they take control in ways that surprise even their musher. And then I felt like we should probably highlight the Iditarod champion lead dog, Slater. He's, of course, from Brent Sass's team. He's completed 2 Iditarods. He is an outgoing, upbeat, and happy dog. He's the big, fluffy orange dog on his team. If you watched the Insider videos or any videos at all, he's the big, fluffy, orange-looking leader. Brent says he's an amazing sled dog. He has a sweet, amazing personality that keeps it positive all the time, which is a great, great quality for the sled dog out on the trail. Slater's litter name was after the Dazed and Confused movie. Dazed and Confused. That's a repeat. Okay. Slater is one of the characters in that show and in the movie, and his siblings are Woody and Pink, and they're both in Brent's team this year as well. The dog is of Sass bloodlines, but the base of the Sass lines are Mackey and King bloodlines. So he's somehow, I think, related to Prophet in a roundabout way.
Wow.
But yeah, so those are the 2 that I wanted to feature just because they were the ones that were really the stars of the show, at least for the race. But like I said, you just scroll down here and there's so many amazing dogs. Gouda is if you go onto Faces and go look up Gouda, he's absolutely adorable. He's got the most personality in his face of any of these dogs. It's just such a great portrait that I fell in love with that dog. He's from Matt Hall's kennel. He's got a great, great story as well.
So before I say my part on a couple of dogs that I would like to mention, let's do some of the more famous dogs in history. I'm going to do 4 of them, and if you can think of 4 of them and who they belong to, please do that as well. So my 4 are Balto and Togo from way back in the day. Everybody knows those 2 dogs, especially if you have a kid running around the house and they've seen the Disney movies. I'm sure you know those 2 dogs there. 3rd and 4th are Zorro and Larry from Lance Mackey's kennel. Those 2 dogs were absolutely pivotal for his reign over Iditarod for so many years. All those wins. The only champion that has, 4 Iditarods and 4 Yukon Quests as well. Amazing dogs that they were. And you had mentioned those dogs in your talk about Prophet way back in terms of bloodlines. So those are my 4. Who do you have?
Okay, so I'm so glad you did not pick the easy ones other than Balto and Togo. You can't talk about sled dogs, especially history of Iditarod sled dogs, and not mention Susan Butcher's Granite. He has a book written about him. He is very important to the Iditarod story, especially when it comes to Susan. He was her lead dog for at least 2 of her Iditarod wins, possibly 3. He was the one, there was a lot of controversy back then because he was the lead dog that was not getting the Golden Harness Award. Mushers were choosing different dogs other than Granite, and it was believed at the time, and the story still is, that one of the reasons why Granite didn't win had nothing to do with the fact that, there were better dogs out there on the trail somewhere. It was the fact that his musher was Susan Butcher. Whether or not it was just because they were jealous that she was beating them so often, or if it was because it was a woman beating all of these men and they were upset about that, especially since they were becoming the butt of a joke. Who knows? Everybody's got an opinion on why it was, but Granite in his last Iditarod that Susan won, he also won the Golden Harness Award. So he definitely deserves his place in Iditarod history. And in fact, in one of the Iditarods, I believe it was 1987, Rick Swenson even said that Susan her ego needed to be taken down a peg because she wasn't as good a musher as she thinks she is. It's just that she has a really good lead dog. So he's talking about Granite, which, yes, as a lead dog, and all the dogs are very important to that, but you still have to have one heck of a coach to get those dogs all the way to Nome in first place. So it was a cheap shot, I think, on Rick's part. Speaking of Rick, though, my second sled dog is Andy, and that's Rick's most famous lead dog, who ran him through snowstorms that got him wins or very close to wins that no other dog was even wanting to go out in, and Andy just always charged through. I've noticed that when that special bond happens between a musher and a lead dog, magic happens. They can kind of sense each other's thoughts. Anything that's going wrong with that particular dog, it's going to show in the musher. I've seen it many times before in different teams where that dog is the be-all, end-all. They're not only the cheerleader, they're also the team captain, much more than the musher is. So Andy was one of those dogs. Also want to give a shout-out to one of my favorite, well, the next 2 are 2 dogs that I actually got to know. One of them was Tanner, who is Mitch's star lead dog and won him the 2013 Iditarod. Tanner had such a personality and knew that he was big man on campus before we knew he was big man on campus. He was a star leader. He's dad to many, many CV dogs, rightfully so, and just such a cocky little jerk of a dog, but also one of the best dogs ever. And then I want to give a shout out to I know I'm talking a lot of CV here, but these are dogs that I actually know, and I do want to give a shout out to Fridge. I don't think many race fans know about this dog. He was one of Dallas's leaders before he started winning things. He was not a reject out of Mitch's kennel, but he and Mitch did not get along. He just did not listen to Mitch. If Mitch wanted him to go right, he'd go left, or he'd sit or whatever. He had that personality that if he didn't click with you, he wasn't going to run with you. And he and Dallas did really well together. It was one of those things. Dallas just basically said, you know what? I can train this dog and I can get him to be a really great leader. And he was the start of Dallas's kennel kind of jumping from mid-level to top 10. So Fridge definitely deserves a quick shout out because he was such a fun little orange dog, and he was one of my favorites at Wild Ride. So I wanted to mention him too.
And for me, this story can probably be told in any sled dog kennel around the world, and that is your dogs are your life if you're a dog musher. It is truly a lifestyle. It is not a sport. They are everything and anything to you as a dog musher. And I want to profile or give a quick tribute to a couple of my own dogs And I have never finished Iditarod, but it kind of goes with this story here. And the dogs' names are Bodie and Reagan. I'm sure Toni is familiar with these dogs if she follows us on social media. But way back in 2010, my daughter Nicole was just turning 12 years old, and we flew up to Alaska. Just she and I, Mom and her brothers were still back in Denver. It was a Saturday afternoon, and we looked at this jankety old cabin in Willow, Alaska, and I said, "Okay, Nicole, this is the deal. I want you to text your mom, and I want you to tell her if we're going to move to Alaska." So I left it in the hands of a 12-year-old, and she texted Mom.
Because why wouldn't you?
Yes, of course. She texted her mom, and remember, this is in 2010 with a 12-year-old with a cell phone, and she typed, "Mom, we're moving to Alaska." So we packed up the U-Haul and did the move to Alaska. We moved up here, and we got 2 dogs from a friend of mine. Her name is April Cox. She's down in California. I picked up Reagan right before we flew up, and she flew up pretty much at the time when we had the U-Haul in tow. And a couple of hours or a couple of days later or so, a couple months, should I say, later, Bodie arrived, and those guys became sort of the start of our kennel. Bodie and Reagan, both purebred Siberian Huskies. We ended up writing a children's book about those 2 dogs where they were showcased. And, of course, we give that out every time we go to a kindergarten class. We give out our little children's book and tell the story about Bodie and Reagan and how that they have truly started us on our journey. During that time, my daughter Nicole ended up running Junior Iditarod twice as a teenager, and I put my Iditarod dreams sort of on the back burner so she could do her thing. And I still have that crazy Iditarod dream. That's why we moved up here. And I am always telling people, hey, as long as I'm not the oldest rookie to ever sign up, I am still doing something right. So I'm 51 right now. I don't think I'm the oldest rookie yet. So I have a few years to line up before I become the oldest rookie. But the whole idea with this is Bodie and Reagan have been instrumental in building our life in Alaska. It's why we still are dog mushers. It's why we do this show. It's why I have this passion. It's everything to us. It is our lifestyle. Sadly, Reagan passed away late this summer from a very quick cancer. We didn't really even see it coming. She was perfectly healthy one day, and she went downhill very quick, and just a few days later. Our buddy Bodie is now 10 years old, and he goes on all of our trips with us to these school visits, and he is a registered therapy dog. So not only is he a sled dog, he's a little old now, but he's also a therapy dog, and definitely is part of sort of mushing history on that note. So just a quick profile of Bodie and Reagan, and I'm sure every one of these mushers, whether they have finished as champions or scratched, with that agony of defeat, have a very, very similar story to what I just told you about a couple of our favorite dogs. Toni, my goodness, we are at an hour, 17 minutes. It's by far the longest episode that we've had this year. We've been on the air about 30 hours, I think, so longer than any other year this year, so a heck of a long time. I'm going to sort of leave you with the last word, and then I'll finish this out, and that will be it. That will be a wrap.
Yeah, it's been an Iditarod to remember. I'm so very thankful that it happened, that we were able to have an Iditarod like the ones that we've always known. Last year was something unique, and I hope we never have to repeat it. And I'm really hopeful. I think it's probably a little naive to think that we will see Iditarod continue for another 50 years, both with the climate issues that we have as well as the political climate that we have and the battles that face the race and the lifestyle in general. But I want to see it continue for as many years to come, even with her growing pains and her drama. This is Alaska and this is Iditarod, and I'm so very thankful to have been on this show for the last 2 weeks to talk about it with you.
Excellent. And for me, this last bit is going to go to my co-host, Toni. She really came through this year. I really appreciate it. I've been here in Washington for the last 4 days doing 10 hours a day of a wilderness first responder recertification, so my mind has been all over the place, but Toni took the ball and ran with it. She really covered our behinds with show topics and the whole 9 yards the last few days because of limited internet and everything else that goes on here. I could not do this show alone by far. This show would absolutely suck if I did it as a single host. So it's always a pleasure to have somebody as knowledgeable as Toni. This goes out to our buddy Alex Stein, of course. He recommended you. It's just a pleasure to have somebody as knowledgeable as you, as passionate as you, as giving as you are to your fans, and answering all these tweets and Facebook messages and keeping up with all of that. I don't even know how you do it. I'm sure you're ready to crash tonight and think about this in the morning. But anyway, my hat goes off to my co-host, and I'm looking very forward to our next year together and what we can accomplish on our podcast. I think it's going to be awesome. And my last thing to say is please join us in the off season. Keep the spirit of our show alive, and of course dog sledding in general, because it is the fans that are a huge driver to the success of this entire sport. It's a lifestyle for us mushers, but of course a lot of us do it because we love interacting with our fans, and those fans become sponsors, and those sponsors become supporters, and of course those supporters and fans become the voice, a positive voice of our sport, and that is what we need. That's why we do this podcast. So with that, Toni, again, thank you very much, and I hope to see you or talk to you very soon, and we will see you guys next time. Goodbye.
From DogWorks Radio, this is Mushing Radio. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we invite you to subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll find a link on the episode notes. You can tap or swipe on the episode cover art, and you'll see some offers from our sponsors. You can support our show by supporting them. If you like what you have heard, we would love it if you could give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends how to subscribe too. Your hosts are Alex Stein and Robert Forto. Our producer is Robert Forto, created for DogWorks Radio.